Welcome to Section 3. In this section, we will be discussing how to manage an emergency scene. Emergencies can take many forms, like fire, a bomb scare, an explosion, a spillage, or a release of toxins. Your employer will have plans to deal with all possible emergencies that can occur at your workplace. These plans will have been discussed with you during your induction training, and it will also be posted on notice boards. These plans rely on the employees to act in a certain manner during an emergency, to ensure that no one else is injured or killed during these situations. During a fire, everyone's safety depends on good preparation and efficient evacuation. Every industrial organization should establish an internal mechanism that will be able to act swiftly in time of an emergency and protect property and lives. For this purpose, emergency coordinators should be appointed at top management level to devise and prepare for any emergency situation or other eventuality. Industrial civil protection consists of the planning and preparation carried out by management in any organization to achieve a state of preparedness. The plan of action should firstly consider the self-sufficiency of the enterprise and the extent to which outside sources of help, for example, fire and police departments and hospitals, may be required. In widespread emergency situations, regular supplies and equipment may not be immediately available or may be in short supply. The community services may also not be able to cope. Emphasis in any emergency should therefore first be placed on self-help, and thereafter, the assistance of the relevant authorities should be sought. A disaster is any unforeseen, uncontrolled incident, with potential to cause loss or damage of a severe nature and considerable extent. Types of disasters. There are various types of natural disasters, over which man has no control, and which require quick action and civil emergency procedures. These are floods, tornadoes, and earthquakes. However, there are also man-made, or man-initiated disasters, for which man is usually responsible. These are plant fires, chemical accidents, civil disturbances, riots and sabotage. Coping with an emergency. All available manpower and resources to cope with an emergency, and thus to keep essential services running smoothly, is needed during an emergency situation. In the case of a civil emergency, the following points should be remembered. One should be spiritually and emotionally prepared to handle disasters, for example, to keep up the morale of workers or inhabitants. At home, one should always keep an emergency cupboard, where items such as a fire aid kit, fire extinguisher, gas, and additional tools are kept. One should also have a pre-packed haversack or small suitcase containing personal requisites. There should also be emergency food rations to provide for each member of the family for at least 7 days. Other compact meals could be kept in the event of a crisis, but most essential, water is necessary. Water should be kept in a cool place. If uncertain about the purity of water, it should be boiled. Some of the emergency situations, which could be encountered within the work situation, or even at home, will be discussed. Guidelines to handle these situations are also suggested. Fires. If there are burglar bars on the windows of a building, ensure that there is an alternative, easy way of escape from the building. Children should be wrapped in blankets to protect them against flames. Sound the alarm immediately. Proceed to an area, such as a common or a declared emergency shelter. Evacuate all people and pets from the building. Close up interleading doors as you go out. Disconnect the electric power before you try to extinguish the fire. Aim the extinguisher or water jet at the base of the fire. If the floor is burning, direct the jet from the bottom upwards. Do not enter a burning room or building. If someone is running with burning clothes on, catch them and roll them in a blanket. Power failures. During power failures, you will not have cooking and lighting facilities. Always have alternative means available, such as coal, wood, gas, or paraffin. It is always advisable to not use candles in the workplace or home, as they are a high fire risk. Hurricanes. Stay indoors during a hurricane. Take cover under a table or bed. If the roof should be ripped off, these places are the safest. Earthquakes. Disconnect all power and gas at once, and evacuate the house or building as quickly as possible. If you are trapped in a house or building, take shelter under a bed or table, and protect yourself against falling objects, such as bricks or glass. Floods. If you live in a low-lying area, first assist children and elderly persons to higher ground or onto a roof, as quickly as possible. Take warm clothing and food to this spot, as well as a torch with which to signal. If time permits, you could also carry some of your possessions to a safe place. Try to divert the water flow with sandbags or other objects at strategic points. Wait for help. Wildfires. First and foremost, make sure everyone stays safe. Everything else can be replaced. If requested by the authorities, immediately follow all evacuation orders. If you have time to act, and the fires are far enough away that they are not threatening your safety, here are some things you can do to assist firefighters and minimize the damage to your property. Listen to emergency officials. If they say evacuate, leave your home immediately. If you see a fire, report it. You may be the first one to spot a hot spot, so call the emergency services immediately if you see a fire, even if it is a small one. Shut off the gas. Turn off propane at the tank, or natural gas at the meter, and turn off all pilot lights. Take the kindling away. Move furniture away from windows and doors. Remove lightweight or non-fire resistant window treatments. Put combustible patio furniture, door mats, toys, and trash cans inside the house or garage. If you have time, rake dead leaves away from the home and from underwood decks, and clear the roof of any pine needles. Make it easy for firefighters. If your home is gated, leave the gate propped open to allow firefighters easy access to your property. Connect garden hoses to outside taps. Fill buckets with water and place them around the house. Put a ladder against a corner of your house so firefighters have easy access to your roof. Wet down your space. Place lawn sprinklers on the roof and near above-ground fuel tanks. Wet down the roof and shrubs within 15 feet of your home, but do not leave sprinklers on or water running, as it can affect the water pressure. Check for embers. Even the smallest ember can start a fire, so continually check your roof and attic for embers, smoke, or fire. Locate your evacuation kits. Make sure your evacuation kits are ready to go. For yourself, your family, and your pets, in case you need to leave. Tornadoes. Some tornadoes strike rapidly, without time for a tornado warning. The following weather signs may mean that a tornado is approaching. A dark or green-colored sky. A large, dark, low-lying cloud. Large hail. A loud roar that sounds like a freight train. If you notice any of these conditions, take cover immediately, and keep tuned to local radio and TV stations, or check the internet. To stay safe during a tornado, the CDC recommends having these items on hand. Fresh batteries and a battery-operated TV, radio, or internet-enabled device, to listen to the latest emergency weather information. A tornado emergency plan, including access to a safe shelter for yourself, your family, and for people with special needs. An emergency kit, including water, non-perishable food, and medication. A list of important information, including telephone numbers. Falling and flying debris cause most deaths and injuries during a tornado. Although there is no completely safe place during a tornado, some locations are much safer than others. Go to the basement, or an inside room without windows on the lowest floor, like a bathroom, closet, or center hallway. Avoid windows. For added protection, get under something sturdy, like a heavy table or workbench. Cover your body with a blanket, sleeping bag, or mattress. Protect your head with anything available. If you are outside, or in a mobile home, find a nearby building, preferably with a basement. If you are in a car, do not try to outrun a tornado, but instead find the nearest sturdy building. Heat waves are a regular occurrence in South Africa. It is important to stay well hydrated by drinking lots of water. Keep a close eye on babies, the elderly, and children to ensure they are well hydrated. Remember to ensure that pets have a cool place to relax and cool, clean water to drink. Wear appropriate clothing and use sunscreen. Limit participation in outdoor activities. If you are going to spend time at a pool, ensure your safety and that of children around you. Do not leave children and pets in a vehicle, even with the window open. Watch for signs and symptoms of severe heat stroke or exhaustion. Civil defense for commerce and industry. It is essential to assess the property and/or firm in terms of its vulnerability for any disasters or threats it may encounter. One should always find out what would be the risk to people, property, and productivity, and what procedures can be adopted to deal with specified dangers, depending on the time they occur. There must always be proper planning. It may be necessary to get the advice of experts, such as the fire brigade. In the planning of civil emergency procedures in the factory, or in any other business, it is desirable to involve shop stewards and any other representatives of labor. This is necessary because whatever measures are taken, they are for the protection of the lives and jobs of the employees, as well as for the protection of the property of that specific company. You should also make provision for alternative contingency plans, and there should be adequate emergency supplies if a disaster should strike the community. Once you have assessed the potential dangers and possible courses of action, you have to formulate specific procedures for dealing with each type of emergency. All but the smallest of firms should encode their policy and procedure in times of emergency in a manual, to be issued to all employees. The following should be included in an emergency manual: a description of possible disasters, with policy and risk statements. A description of the types of plant warning system in operation. A detailed map of the plant, office, or store. A list of emergency services and telephone numbers. The order and route of evacuation, depending on the type of disaster. The listing of key personnel and their deputies. The procedure to report an injury. It is also essential to establish an emergency control center in large firms, plus an equipment control center, where the following will be found: a large facility map, showing all building locations and layouts. A fire map overlay, showing all fire appliances, standpipes, and hose or sprinkler systems. Emergency personnel and equipment records. The names of emergency task forces. Emergency plant equipment. The names of key personnel. The names of emergency backup forces. The names of mutual aid groups. Local civil defense organization, contacts, telephone numbers and names. Proper training and involvement facilities. An organizational diagram, showing the correct chain of command. Disasters often have a significant impact on public health. In more vulnerable parts of the world, that impact can be exacerbated by weak or non-existent healthcare systems and infrastructure. Some disasters, like earthquakes, cause many deaths, while slow-onset floods generally cause few. Floods produce serious food shortages, whereas earthquakes, which are localized, generally do not. Water and sanitation. Water supply and sanitation issues are some of the most pressing problems after major natural disasters. Unfortunately, these are also some of the least visible issues. This contributes to the constant challenge of ensuring that in non-disaster periods, these systems are maintained properly. The systems themselves are often expensive. And more often than not, they are in a state of disrepair. When a water system fails, and the quality of drinking water is affected, and where there are deficiencies in disposing of solid wastes, conditions can become favorable for the spread of a number of diseases. One of the most common is diarrheal disease. This is a major killer of children in other parts of the world, and related to the lack of clean water, and consequently to water systems that are damaged by disasters. Many communicable diseases are spread through fecal contamination of drinking water and food. Therefore, every effort should be made to ensure the sanitary disposal of excreta. Emergency latrines should be made available to the displaced, refugees, relief workers, and residents in areas where toilet facilities have been destroyed. Even if toilets are physically intact, they cannot be flushed without a water supply. Lime should be used in communal trench latrines to reduce the development of methane gas and odors. If no sanitation facilities are available, people should bury their excreta. Proper disposal is required for wastewater from camps for refugees and displaced persons, field hospitals, feeding centers, and washing facilities. Personal hygiene tends to decline after natural disasters, especially in densely populated areas, and where there are water shortages. The following measures are recommended. Provide basic hand washing facilities in shelters, temporary settlements, and camps. Provide washing, cleaning, and bathing facilities in camps for refugees and displaced persons. Make adequate amounts of water available in disaster-stricken areas, camps for refugees and displaced persons. Avoid overcrowding in sleeping quarters. Launch education campaigns on personal hygiene, basic sanitation, and waste management. Communicable and vector diseases. In certain circumstances, a sudden impact disaster can create the potential for a massive outbreak of infectious diseases to occur. Communicable diseases, such as acute respiratory infections or meningitis, occur most often when large groups of people are clustered together in crowded, temporary facilities, as a result of population displacement. These conditions often foster the spread of diseases. In emergency conditions, the routine disease surveillance system is either not up to the task, is disrupted as a direct consequence of the disaster, or cannot provide data quickly enough for timely decision-making. It is recommended, therefore, that a more flexible surveillance system be set up that can report more quickly than the normal surveillance system. Certain types of disasters, especially hurricanes and floods, can increase the chance of vector-borne diseases. Standing water promotes breeding sites for mosquitoes, and the rains or the flooding can wash away any residual pesticides left in the area. Malaria and the Zika virus can be a concern in these scenarios. Damaged health facilities. Damage caused to health infrastructure as a result of a disaster is an important problem. It is impossible to put a price tag on the tremendous human loss that result from the collapse of the health infrastructure. Mental health. With respect to mental health, there is a need to think beyond individuals in the affected community. We must consider the mental health of the survivors, their families, and the humanitarian workers. It is common to feel stress before or after a crisis. Natural and human-caused disasters can have a devastating impact on people's lives because they sometimes cause physical injury, damage to property, or the loss of a home or place of employment. Anyone who sees or experiences this can be affected in some way. Most stress symptoms are temporary and will resolve on their own in a fairly short amount of time. However, for some people these symptoms may last for weeks, or even months, and may influence their relationships with families and friends. Population displacement. In the context of emergencies, displaced people are people who have had to leave their homes as a result of a natural, technological, or deliberate event. People who are displaced within their own country are referred to as internally displaced. People who are displaced across international borders are referred to as refugees. Large-scale population displacement can occur in the wake of natural disasters, such as hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes. Population displacement can also be a result of civil strife. Temporary settlements or more permanent camps can arise as a result of such crises. Some settlements disband rather quickly, but others may become more permanent, particularly in the case of large refugee populations. Although refugee camps are established to provide safety and humanitarian assistance to vulnerable populations, health conditions are often complicated, because camps and temporary settlements present the greatest potential for communicable diseases once the immediate disaster has passed. Temporary settlements often become permanent, even when that is not the intention. The overcrowding contributes to the spread of communicable diseases, as mentioned earlier. Large-scale population displacement can have an impact on urban areas as well, quickly overwhelming public services that are unable to meet the increased demand, exacerbating health problems. In order to minimize the loss of lives and property, and to reduce the loss in production, during any type of disaster, an organization should do the following. Establish warning, alert signals and systems. Establish emergency evacuation routes. In fact, point out all possible exits before they ever need to be used. Appoint evacuation wardens. Establish emergency rescue teams. Establish standby communication systems and operators. Have available emergency transport. Have available emergency sanitation to prevent disease spreading. Advise all employees to keep their work areas clean, neat, and unobstructed, so that they will be easy to inspect and easy to evacuate in an emergency. Know where the fire extinguishers are kept, and which types are appropriate to the types of fires which may arise in the workplace. Train staff to locate and correctly use all the firefighting equipment. Establish a first aid station with trained first aid officers. Make sure everyone knows who to call for first aid treatment. Record and post police, fire, ambulance, and hospital telephone numbers next to the telephone for immediate reference. An emergency is no time to be hunting for telephone numbers. If a bomb threat is telephoned in, it is essential to get as much information as possible from the call or caller. Try to find out where the bomb is located and the reasons for the threat. Note any background noise and try to form an impression of where the call is being made from. If a suspicious parcel is found, alert the switchboard immediately. Identify yourself and give the operator the location of the parcel and its appearance. Stay on the telephone until you have answered all the questions. The telephonist should initiate the action to set off the alarm and to telephone the necessary authorities. It is essential to keep staff calm. Panic is contagious, and might spread to others, thus causing more harm than good. When the alarm is sounded, there are 3 things to remember. Open as many windows as possible, to minimize the damage caused by the sudden rise in air pressure, should an explosion occur. Gather those parcels and bags that belong to you, to help make the task of searching for foreign parcels easier. Leave the building by the shortest route possible, and by the stairs rather than by the lifts. One must be on the constant alert for suspicious bags and parcels, but one must not touch or move any suspicious objects. Once one is safely out of the building, tell the officer on duty or the security department about the parcel. The police and the security personnel can usually examine suspicious parcels without having to handle them. Trained sniffer dogs and special equipment can be used to detect whether a package contains explosives. Walk quickly and calmly to the nearest exit. Always walk clear of the buildings, and assemble staff away from the building. Ensure that all the staff have been evacuated from the building, and do not allow anyone to leave before they have been told to do so. Should anyone be missing, contact the security department. Under no circumstances should anyone go back into the building without the permission of the security officer. In the event of a bomb threat, investigating authorities need to have architectural plans of the building involved. Therefore, it is recommended that a copy of these plans be kept with the security officer at the entrance of the building. Evacuation is moving an injured or ill person to medical care. Evacuate if the answer to any of the following questions is yes or unsure. Is the condition life-threatening? Could the condition worsen if the person is not transported? If you do not move the person, will further injury occur? Does the person need medical care or equipment available from outside medical help? Would distance, terrain, or weather cause a delay in getting the medical care? Is the person unable to travel or participate in the activity for which they went to a remote location at a reasonable pace owing to a medical problem? Delayed travel plans or start evacuation if the person experiences the following. The patient's condition is not improving. The patient is experiencing debilitating pain. The patient is unable to travel at a reasonable pace. Passing blood via the mouth or rectum. Serious altitude illness. Infections not improving. Chest pain, not caused by a ribcage injury. Severe wounds requiring medical care. Person's dysfunctional psychological status, impairing safety of others. Determine the best method of evacuation, based on the following. Severity of the illness, or injury. Rescue, and medical skills, of the rescuers. Physical and psychological condition, of the rescuers, and the ill or injured people. Availability of equipment, and aid for the rescue. The time it would take, to evacuate the person by other means, as determined by distance, terrain, weather and other conditions. And cost relating to the rescue. Guidelines, for ground evacuation. At least 3 people should accompany a walking person. If the person is carried out, 1 to 2 people should proceed ahead, to notify authorities that assistance is needed. Guidelines for helicopter evacuation. Evacuate only if it will save the person, or offer greater chance of recovery. The pilot believes conditions are safe. Ground evacuation is too dangerous, or long, or there are not enough rescuers. Exercise proper helicopter safety. Do not approach a helicopter until aircraft personnel signals it is safe to do so. Do not approach a helicopter from the rear, where the fast spinning rotor is invisible and dangerous. Do not forget to protect yourself against wind chill and flying dirt and debris. Do not approach from the uphill side. Do not stand up when approaching. Keep as low as possible. Priorities in an emergency. In all emergencies, the first aider must do the following. Ensure the safety of themselves and any other bystanders and the casualty. Assess and examine the situation promptly. Ask someone to call for help. Closely monitor the casualty for changes in condition. Examine the nature of the casualties. The following actions are compelled to examine the nature of the casualty. Record observations on a piece of paper. If you send someone for help, have him carry a piece of paper that states the following. Victim or victim's location. The nature of the emergency. The number of people needing help. The condition of the victim. What is being done to treat the victim. And any specific environmental conditions or physical obstacles. When calling for help, the phone first approach is recommended in life-threatening situations. This allows for a quicker response time for the ambulance and it is particularly important for casualties suffering from a serious injury, or conditions such as cardiac arrest. Outcomes for these casualties are significantly improved the quicker advanced life support treatment is given. It is important to note, where there is more than one casualty, the care of an unconscious casualty has priority. Calling for help is easy. Any person can call for an ambulance in an emergency. The ambulance operator is trained in receiving emergency calls and providing instructions over the phone if you are unsure what to do. What to say to the emergency medical services? The person who phones the emergency medical services will be asked if an ambulance, fire, or police is requested. The person who phones will be switched through to the requested service. The emergency operator will then ask for information on the following, thus be prepared. The suburb. The address of the incident or casualty. The nearest cross street. The nature of the emergency, for example a car accident, chest pain etc., and how many people are involved. The casualty's condition, for example is the casualty conscious or unconscious? If the casualty is breathing. Your name and the phone number you are calling from. Do not hang up until instructed to do so by the emergency operator and keep the phone line free, in case there is a need for the operator to call you back. Do not stop treatment until the ambulance arrives, or instructed by the ambulance officers, or paramedics. This allows the ambulance officers, or paramedics time, to quickly prepare their equipment, and get ready to take over treatment. In rural locations, where single ambulance officers may respond, you may be asked to remain, and assist the officer, until further backup arrives. In these situations, follow carefully any directions given. The emergency call. Call for help. If somebody arrives to assist you, ask him or her the following. Do you understand Afrikaans or English? Do you know anything about first aid? Please phone the emergency services on 10177, or 112 or 107. As soon as you get through to the EMS, state your name and the telephone number from where you are calling. Then supply the reason for calling, i.e., CPR, choking, etc. Supply exact address, including suburb with landmarks, and nearest crossroads. Report any complication of location, i.e., quote gate number in larger factories etc. Find out and record operator's name, and ask the operator to repeat the address, so you know that he knows where to send the ambulance. Never replace the receiver of the telephone first, always wait for the operator to end off, as this will ensure the rapid response and arrival of the ambulance. Do you understand? What is the number? Are you able to make the call? Come back to me and report. Please hurry. If nobody arrives to assist you, you must carry out the above procedures by yourself. The emergency service could be contacted on the following numbers. Remember, the patient should never be left alone. When the ambulance arrives, the first aider informs the person in charge what has been done. Give his name and address if it is required, and only then leave the scene of the accident. The first aider should protect him or herself from injury and death, since an injured or dead first aider is useless to any emergency situation or patient. In order to prevent a mishap, the first aider must always remember to first observe the scene, to determine if danger exists, and if additional help is needed, before attempting to help. First and foremost, identify the presence of hazards. Then identify, if possible, the cause of the emergency, and the immediate environmental dangers. Are you as a first aider trained, and able to handle the particular hazards that are found on the scene? If not, the first aider must call for the appropriate trained personnel to deal with the problem. Remember, the first aider should never endanger themselves. The following are possible hazards that may be encountered in the field. Fire or the potential of the fire. Hazardous materials, like chemicals and gases. Traffic. Weather. Hostile bystanders, for example, riots and other similar situations. And electricity in a dangerous capacity, for example a leakage. Emergency rules. The following rules are not negotiable. Safety for yourself, the patient, and the environment. Always stay calm. Do not move the patient, unless his life is in immediate danger. Do not leave the patient alone unnecessary. Do not give the patient anything to eat, drink or smoke. Assessing the scene. Stand still. Is it safe? Follow the emergency rules. Think. What happened? Sources of information and help. Classification of emergencies. Medical. The problem is within the body and is associated with illness. Trauma. The problem arises from outside the body, and is usually associated with injuries. The mechanism of injury will determine the manpower and equipment, for example, jaws of life, needed to deal with the emergency. Information. Information will be primarily obtained from the patient. Other sources are bystanders, friends, or family. It can be based on physical evidence on the scene by using your senses, for example, smell, hear, feel, see, and taste, especially if the patient cannot cooperate, for example, age or is unconscious. Safety. It is most important to survey the scene for any possible danger, and to correct life-threatening situations. This must be done in a speedy, calm, and systematic manner, as hazards can take different forms, for example. Safety for yourself. Ensure that you have the necessary protective equipment with you, for example, gloves, life aid, etc. Safety of the patient. Only move the patient if his or her life is in danger. Safety of the situation. And safety of the area. Ensure that circumstances are safe by removing hazards and potential dangers, or by evacuating the scene of the emergency. Triage. Triage principles refer to prioritization of patients for medical treatment. In other words, it means the process of prioritizing sick or injured people for treatment according to the seriousness of the condition or injury. Triage is the medical screening of patients according to their need for treatment and the resources available. It applies to mass casualty situations when conventional standards of medical care cannot be delivered to all victims. The treatment must be consistent for all casualties, and the condition must be monitored and treated accordingly. Sorting of patients on a scene. In adults, priority for treatment is based on rapid assessment of level of consciousness and vital signs. As a first aider, you will assess the victims one by one and identify vital signs to give you an indication of the degree of urgency for treatment. You will then prioritize the urgency according to the level of seriousness of the injured person. The first aider should distinguish between injured patients that walk or sit and patients that are lying down. The first aider should assess continuously while sorting the patients and delegate tasks to other. That way he can determine if a person's condition deteriorates. The injured person will then be moved to another or higher group. Group 1 to 4. Group 1, these injured persons have life-threatening injuries such as cardiac arrest, respiratory problems, serious bleeding, amputations, open chest injuries, serious head injuries, and should get immediate attention. Group 2, these injured persons have serious but not life-threatening injuries, for example, head injuries, multiple or large fractures, neck and spinal injuries. Group 3, the injured persons have light injuries, for example, burns, small fractures, wounds, and shock, but do not need immediate attention. Group 4, these persons are deceased. The scene. Location of emergency, for example, residential or rural areas. Exact address, or landmarks and crossroads. Location of the victim, for example, trapped in vehicle. Associated complications that will need special equipment. Plan. Whom to call for help? What to say? If you ever find yourself in an emergency situation, where someone is ill or injured, then you will need to perform a primary survey. On arrival, first aiders should follow the procedure below. Take charge of the situation. Call to attract the attention of bystanders. Assess hazards by establishing cause of accidents, and secondary causes of the result of the accident. Identify yourself as a first aider and offer help. Before attending to the patient of any emergency, you must first survey the scene, to ensure your safety. If you as the first aider is injured or killed, you cannot render assistance. If you as the first aider is contaminated with infected blood, you can die of a disease. No injured person should be moved if his or her life is not in danger. If a person is not breathing and has no pulse, his or her life is in danger. Life-threatening situations exist, where there is significant risk of loss of life, for example, people that are trapped in a burning car or a child that is drowning. All hazards, influencing the safety of the first aider and injured, must be removed before assistance can be rendered. Ensure that you have the necessary protective equipment with you, for example latex surgical gloves and a barrier device. Check the patient. After determining that the scene is safe, do a primary examination. This refers to a quick assessment to life-threatening conditions. Responses. Determine the level of consciousness of the injured, by looking and listening. Look for body movement, and listen for noises made by the injured. The initial primary survey is a quick way to assess patients. It can easily be remembered by the letters HHHCAB. The first H stands for hazards. The second height stands for hello. The third H stands for help. C is for circulation. This is when we check for a pulse and excessive arterial bleeding. A is for airway. We check if the patient's airway is open, maintained, and protected. B is for breathing. We check if the patient is breathing normally. If the patient is not breathing or gasping, and the patient does not have a pulse, start with CPR immediately. If the patient is breathing abnormally and has a pulse, start with rescue breaths. If the patient is breathing normally and has a pulse, check for the following. Circulation. Look for obvious open fractures and burns, and treat these injuries first. Airway. Do a log roll or recovery position, to protect and maintain the patient's airway. If you ever find yourself in an emergency situation, then all you need to remember is HHHCAB, and you will be able to systematically assess your patient, and decide what to do.
Right, I arrive at my scene, I check what happened, I gather information from the bystanders, what happened, when did it happen, how did it happen. If it is trauma, I ask the patient to lie still. In this case, this is a non-trauma or a medical patient. So I approach my patient. Good day, ma'am. My name is Nikki. I'm first aid qualified. What is your name? Matapelo. Can you tell me what happened?
I'm not feeling well.
You're not feeling well. Right. Hazards and hello has been done. So I ask my bystanders, sir, can you please phone 112 for me? Tell them I've got an adult female that is not feeling well. Give them the location and report back to me. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Please bring me a first aid kit as well.
I will.
Right. Matapelo, you're obviously speaking to me. Your airway is open. Can you take a nice deep breath in for me? And out. And out. Any pain on that?
No.
Right. So the airway is open. The breathing is checked. And then we're just going to quickly check for any life-threatening bleeding around the patient.
Now that you know the patient's basic observations and condition, you have more time to thoroughly examine a conscious patient, by systematically looking and feeling. The secondary survey is the practical management of injuries, in the order of priority, as detected or medical conditions. Conduct a head-to-toe secondary examination. Remember to be sensitive to the age, sex, and culture of the patient. Start the secondary examination, by informing the patient of what you are going to do, and the reason for doing the examination. Listen carefully to what the patient tells you, while doing your examination. Check for any abnormal fluids, numbness or tingling, and abnormal sounds. Also remember to check for medical alert bracelets or necklaces. Pay attention to the history of the patient and incident. The acronym SAMPLE can be used for this. S stands for signs and symptoms. Which signs do you see, and which symptoms does the patient have? A is for allergies. What is the patient allergic to? Is the patient struggling to breathe because of something they ate? M is for medication. Which medication is the patient currently taking? Is the patient feeling ill because he forgot to take his medication this morning? P is for past illnesses. Does the patient have any chronic conditions, like high blood pressure or diabetes? L is for the last time the patient ate or drank. Is the patient maybe feeling dizzy because they have not eaten today? E is for event. What happened, where and when did it happen? A good tool to remember the signs of injury is dots, when you look and feel during your secondary examination. D stands for deformity. Do you see any deformities on the body? If you are unsure, compare the two sides of the body with each other. O is for open wounds. Look for any open wounds or bleeding. T is for tenderness. The patient will tell you if the location is tender to touch. S is for swelling. Look for any swelling on bruising on the body. After immediate threats to life have been removed, a secondary examination is necessary. This is a systematic examination starting from the head down to the lower limbs, as follows. Temperature. Feel the forehead and the back of the neck, to see if the skin temperature is much warmer or cooler than that of your hand. Pulse. Check the pulse, noting its rate, strength, and rhythm. Breathing. Note the rate, rhythm and depth, and smell the breath for distinctive odors of chemicals, or acetone. Eyes. Note if the pupils are fully dilated, constricted, or of unequal size, and then check for reaction to light. Ears and nose. Look for any blood and other fluid discharge, that may indicate skull injuries. Mouth. Check the mouth for fluids or vomitus, that might affect breathing. Also check for false teeth, if the casualty is unconscious. Skin. Note the color, the amount of perspiration, and the temperature. Skull. Check for bruises, bumps or bleeding, that may indicate head injuries. Neck. Check the neck gently. If there is pain, or a deformity, suspect a fracture of the spine at the neck. Spine. Feel along the center line of the back for irregularities. If there is bleeding, you feel an area that is warm and wet, or if there is tenderness and pain, suspect a fracture of the spine. Chest area. Look for wounds, and note any unnatural movement of the chest. Gently feel the ribs with the fingertips for irregularities or, if the casualty is conscious, ask him to take a deep breath and cough. Pain and tenderness indicate a possible fracture of the ribs or sternum. Abdominal area. Look for wounds and bleeding, and ask the casualty to pull in and push out their abdomen. Suspect internal injuries if this causes pain. Pelvic area. Gently feel on either side of the hips, for signs of tenderness or irregularities, that might indicate a fracture of the pelvis or dislocation of the hip. Lower and upper limbs. Check the limbs for irregularities in the long bones or joints. To assess for nerve injury and loss of power, ask the casualty if he is feeling in the fingers and toes, and if he can move his limbs. After checking the patient, call the emergency services, and give them a description of the emergency, as well as the location of the scene. After calling the emergency services, provide appropriate care, based on your primary survey of the patient, until emergency services or other advanced medical personnel arrives and takes over. The following acronyms can be used when handing a patient over to a person with a higher medical qualification. These acronyms help us to remember which information is important. For a medical patient, remember NIS. N stands for the nature of the illness. I stand for which illness does the patient have. S stands for signs you can see, and symptoms that the patient may have. T is for which treatment did you provide to the patient. T is for the time the incident happened. For a trauma patient, remember MIT. M stands for the mechanism of injury. How and what injured the patient. I stands for injuries. What injuries did the patient obtain? S stands for the signs you can see and the symptoms the patient is feeling. T stands for the treatment that you have provided to the patient. T stands for the time the incident or accident happened.
We are going to be performing the secondary survey now. Now, hazards and health, circulation, airway and breathing has been done. We are going to be looking now for any other injuries using dots, deformities, open wounds, tenderness or swelling. Now, I want to reiterate, if possible, if I have a female patient, let it be a female that does the secondary survey. If it's a male patient, preferably a male first aider. Right, when we do the secondary survey, we do a head to toe. So we start at the head. First thing that we do, always close your fingers and feel for any dots. Feel on top of the head and feel around the eyes. If the patient is awake, ask them to close their eyes and then to open it again, checking for the pupil reactions. From there, we check the nose and we check inside the nose if there's any blood. From there, we can check inside the ears and at the back of the ears just to see if there's any fluids or any bruising behind the ears. From there, we feel the upper and lower jaw. We can ask the patient if she's awake to open her mouth, check if all the teeth are in place and not broken, and also check for any blood or vomit inside the mouth. You can relax, thank you very much. From there, we go down to the neck. We look for any distended neck veins or a deviated trachea. Or you can even look for a medical alert necklace. From there, we go to the shoulders. Remember, closed fingers. First things that we feel is the collarbones. Just press slightly down, not too hard. You will feel movement if there is a problem. Okay. From there, we feel if the shoulder is in place. Look at your patient's response. If there's any pain, she will frown or tell you. We go down to the upper arm. Just feel slightly, putting your hands in this position and just squeezing towards each other slightly. Please don't press too hard because if there's a fracture, you might make it worse. If you don't suspect any injuries on the elbow, you can ask the patient if they can bend the elbow, and then also the lower arm. If you get to the lower arm, feel if there's a pulse present. We check the hand, each and every finger. Okay. Also remember to check inside the hand and to check capillary refill. What we do on the one side, we do on the other side. Now, if your patient is awake, Matapelo, can you take a deep breath in for me? Can you breathe out? Any pain on that?
No.
Okay. If the patient does say that there's any pain, we expose. Remember to try and keep it as private as possible. And we check for any injuries on the chest. You can also feel by just placing your hands inward and pressing slightly inwards to feel if there's any broken bones. And you must feel the sternum. Now please never place your hand like this on a female. Your hands must always show downwards. Right. Then we go down to the abdomen. You take your strongest hand, you put it at the bottom, and your weakest hand on top. And you just gently squeeze in, and you move in 4 quadrants of the stomach or abdomen, looking for any response from the patient. At the pelvis, all we do is just place our hands in the side and press towards each other, just to feel if there's any instability. Please do not press on top of the hips. From there, we go to the upper legs, and we do the same as with the arms, gently squeezing towards each other. At the knee, you will feel the knee. This is a bone that moves. Okay. If it is stuck, it usually means that there is a problem. We go down to the lower knee, with the lower leg. Right? You can remove the shoes, it's not a problem. And then we can feel if the toes are moving. Matapelo, can you move your toes for me? Very good. Any pain on that?
No.
Okay. If I, like the bottom of your shoe, can you feel that?
Yes.
Very good. And if you remove the shoe, remember to check for capillary refill. What you do on the one side, you do on the other side.
Measuring a person's level of consciousness. Changes in the level of consciousness of a person who may have sustained an injury to the head are an important sign of the way the brain is functioning. The scale used to measure this is commonly called AFPU. See the following page for details. The head-to-toe survey of the injured patient. Management. Life over limb. Control bleeding, cool burn wounds, immobilize fractures. The head and neck. Control bleeding and cover wounds. The chest. Control bleeding and cover wounds. Close any sucking open chest wound, which will be discussed later. Stabilize impaled objects and cover wounds. The stomach. Control bleeding and cover wounds. The extremities. Control bleeding with direct or indirect pressure and cover wounds. Position the patient. Cavities gets preference over extremities. If a cavity is injured, position the patient onto injured side. If extremities are injured, position onto uninjured side. Reassure and maintain body temperature. Monitor the vital signs every 5 to 10 minutes until EMS takes over. Injuries. There are 3 injuries that take precedence over the rest, and emergency services should be called if the patient has sustained injuries to the head, neck or back. The patient is having trouble breathing. The patient is unable to move or use the injured body part without experiencing pain. These require special and careful attention. Information needed to determine the casualties, injuries or illnesses grouped under 3 headings and defined as follows. History. Events leading to emergency situations, accidents or violence. Signs. Conditions you can see that indicate disease or injury, for example, body temperature, pulse, breathing patterns commonly named as the vital signs. Symptoms. The sensation the person feels as a result of the injury or illness, i.e., cold, pain, nausea, numbness, etc. Monitoring the patient. Vital signs and symptoms. It is especially important to monitor the patient, as the condition of the patient can change very rapidly. It is often particularly useful to provide the paramedics with a record of the patient's condition. It is for these reasons that the following signs and symptoms be monitored regularly, approximately every 5 minutes. Level of consciousness, also known as AFPU. The breathing rate. Circulation, especially pulse rate. Skin color. And skin temperature. Monitor casualty and treat according to vital signs and condition. There are different signs that a first aider should be aware of. These signs are stressed in order to monitor the condition of the injured person. The pupils. Shine a flashlight or headlamp into the injured person's eyes. Note whether the pupils contract symmetrically when exposed to the light. If the pupils are unequal in size, then it may be a sign that the person is using drugs. Look out for these warning signs because you can save a life. Blood circulation or capillary refill. This is usually done on the nail beds of a patient. This can be done on the fingers or toes. If the white area does not turn pink within 2 seconds, this may indicate that oxygen-rich blood is not circulating properly. Blood will return to a healthy person's capillaries in less than 2 seconds, changing the color of the pressed spot from white to pink. Checking for a pulse. The pulse is checked with the index and middle fingertips by gently pushing down onto an artery. There are 3 ways in which a pulse can be measured, namely, carotid pulse. This being the preferred method for checking adults and children. The pulse is checked on the carotid artery in the patient's neck between the neck muscle and the trachea, also known as the air pipe. Radial pulse. This is checked on the palm side of the wrist, above the thumb. Brachial pulse. This is the most reliable and most easily found in infant, located in the inside of upper arm. Femoral pulse. Located in the thigh, halfway between the pubic symphysis and anterior superior iliac spine. Popliteal pulse. Above the knee in the popliteal nasal, found by holding the bent knee. The patient bends the knee at approximately 124 degrees, and the physician holds it in both hands to find the popliteal artery in the pit behind the knee. Dorsalis pedis pulse. Located on top of the foot. Temporal pulse. Located on the temple directly in front of the ear. Never use your thumb to feel for a pulse, as the thumb has a pulse of its own. Do not feel or compress both carotid arteries at the same time. This could affect blood supply to the brain and cause severe damage. Feel for the pulse for 10 seconds. If the pulse is present but the patient is still not breathing, continue artificial respiration at the rate of 1 ventilation every 6 seconds. This is also known as rescue breathing. If there is no pulse, begin CPR immediately. Important to remember that the pulse rate is respective of the age of the patient. Adults have a pulse rate of 60 to 100 beats per minute. Children have a pulse rate of 100 to 120 beats per minute. Infant up to 1 year, a pulse rate of 110 to 160 beats per minute. Skin appearance. The appearance of the skin can be a good indicator of the patient's condition. Check color, condition, and temperature of the skin. The color of the skin. Check the color of skin in the mouth and lips. Red, pink, pale or blue. Checking the lining of the mouth and lips allows a quick assessment of patients from all ethnic backgrounds. The temperature of the skin. Is the skin warm or cool to touch? The skin condition. Is the skin dry or wet? Breathing or respiration. The respiratory rate is the number of breaths a person takes per minute. The rate is usually measured when a person is at rest and involves counting the number of breaths for 1 minute. This is often done by counting how many times the chest rises. To save time, this can be done over 30 seconds, and then the result doubled. However, this is a less accurate method. Respiratory rates may increase with fever, illness, and with other medical conditions. For example, an asthma attack is likely to significantly increase the respiratory rate. When checking respiratory rate, it is important to also note whether a person has any difficulty breathing, or if there are any sounds during breathing, for example, a wheeze. Normal respiratory rates for an adult person at rest range from 12 to 20 breaths per minute. Children have faster respiratory rates. An effective way to take a respiratory rate is to combine it with taking the pulse rate. Explain to the person that you're going to take their pulse for a minute. Count the pulse for the first 30 seconds, and then count the respiratory rate for the second 30 seconds. This avoids the person changing their breathing pattern subconsciously. The breathing rates are as follows. Adults, 12 to 20 breaths a minute. Children, 5 to 12 years, 20 to 25 breaths a minute. Children, 2 to 5 years, 25 to 30 breaths a minute. Children, 1 to 2 years, 25 to 35 breaths a minute. Infant up to 1 year, 30 to 40 breaths a minute. Blood pressure, also known as BP, is the pressure exerted by circulating blood on the walls of blood vessels, and constitutes one of the principal vital signs. The pressure of the circulating blood decreases as it moves away from the heart through arteries and capillaries, and toward the heart through veins. Arterial pressure is most commonly measured via a sphygmomanometer, which historically used the height of a column of mercury to reflect the circulating pressure. Today, blood pressure values are still reported in millimeters of mercury, though aneroid and electronic devices do not use mercury. For each heartbeat, blood pressure varies between systolic and diastolic pressures. Systolic pressure is peak pressure in the arteries, which occurs near the end of the cardiac cycle, when the ventricles are contracting. Diastolic pressure is minimum pressure in the arteries, which occurs near the beginning of the cardiac cycle, when the ventricles are filled with blood. An example of normal measured values for a resting, healthy adult human is 120 mm of mercury systolic, and 80 mm of mercury diastolic. Pulse pressure is the difference between systolic and diastolic pressures. Systolic and diastolic arterial blood pressures are not static but undergo natural variations, from one heartbeat to another and throughout the day. They also change in response to stress, nutritional factors, drugs, disease, exercise, and momentarily from standing up. Sometimes the variations are large. Hypertension refers to arterial pressure being abnormally high, as opposed to hypotension, when it is abnormally low. Along with body temperature and pulse rate, blood pressure measurements are the most commonly measured physiological parameters. Let us recap the summary of emergency treatment sequence. Number 1. Safety of your patient and yourself is of first concern. Check areas for hazardous and safety elements. Number 2. Breathing. Is the patient's airway clear? Number 3. Pulse. Is CPR needed? Number 4. Symptoms. Does the patient experience any pain? Number 5. Bleeding. Treat any bleeding and cover wounds. Number 6. Breaks. Attend to fractures and immobilize them. Number 7. Transport. Get your patient ready for transport to hospital. Number 8. Observation. Watch patient's respiration, pulse, and movements.